Next will be the panel named The Need of Change in the World Governance. After World War II, the World Governance Network formed by Cold War colleagues highlighted the need for a significant restructuring in the context of the global priorities and the new negotiation chapters between countries in the 21st century. The need for change in organizational structures and decision-making mechanism of primary international organizations in the world governance is the priority agenda item. The roadmap and codes of change in the world governance need to be determined as soon as possible in order to achieve more successful results in the dimension of sustainability and inclusiveness of the world economy and politics in the name of global interests. And our moderator is Mr. Ashok Sajanhar, former Ambassador India, esteemed guest. Our next moderator is Mr. Ashok Sajanhar, former Ambassador India. Welcome. And our panelists are Ms. Alev Alatlı, author Turkey, Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, former President of Turkey, Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, former President of Ukraine, Ms. Lauren Lamotte, former Prime Minister Haiti, Mr. Faisal El Fayez, President of the Senate, Jordan. Esteemed guests, next will be the panel named The Need of Change in the World Governance. And we will start to our panel. Our moderator is Mr. Ashok Sajanhar, the former Ambassador India. Our panelists are Ms. Alev Alatlı, author Turkey. I would like to invite you stage Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, former President of Ukraine, Ms. Lauren Lamotte, former Prime Minister Haiti, Mr. Faisal El Fayez, President of Senate Jordan. Please. We are waiting for you. I would like to invite you on stage our panelists. We are waiting for you. The need of change in the world governance panel is starting. Please, I would like to invite on stage esteemed guests. We are waiting for you. Yeah. I would like to invite Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, the former president of Ukraine. Huh, okay. Alev Alatlı, Azure Turkey. This is yours. And I would like to invite Miss Lorraine Lamotte, the former Prime Minister Haiti. Is she here? I will ask. Huh. He isn't here. He isn't here.
So I will go in that order if you are able to get.
Çok çabuk, çok çabuk. Alev Hanım burada mı öğrenelim. Bir de Loren Lamotte burada mı bekliyorlar panel için. I'm asking for Miss Alev and Miss Loren.
And you'll give me how long? 1 hour?
We don't have enough time. Alev Hanım burada mı? Pardon.
That's okay. Well, friends, good afternoon. A very warm welcome, and delighted to welcome each and every one of you to this literally a very high-powered panel on a very, very important subject, very important issue. Now, we know that we have about 1 hour or so that was allocated to this panel. And we also have seen that we have a very tough timekeeper, and also I'm sure my panelists and I, we don't want to stand between you and the lunch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some brief introductory remarks, and then I'm going to ask all my panelists to speak. Maybe what we could do is about anything around 8 minutes or so, if the panelists so agree. They could speak for about 8 minutes. And I would definitely like, since we have the privilege of having these very distinguished members in the panel, that we throw the floor open to the audience, because we have some extremely distinguished and eminent people in the audience, and maybe we have possibility of some questions also from the audience. But we will try to finish our deliberations by about 1:30, if that is all right. So this is the way we are going to proceed. So first of all, let me thank the organizers, particularly Cengiz Bey, for getting all of us together, not only for this panel, but for this 3-day get-together. Yeah, I understand we have 45 minutes for this panel, which means that the timeline that I have mentioned to you, that should be quite appropriate for us. So thanks to the organizers, Cengiz Bey, his dedicated team, and particularly for introducing this subject in the meeting. I'm particularly happy also that this panel, which is the need of change in world governance, and as the introduction was also made, that we are speaking about this right in the center of this three-day conference. We have heard some comments, some analysis yesterday, and some statements also yesterday as to what needs to be done. And I'm sure the discussions that we are going to have just now will inform whatever comes subsequently. We have had the benefit of listening to some of the deliberations that have taken place. The title of the conference, as has been mentioned, emphasizes and presumes that there is an urgent and imperative need for a change in world governance. I would like to flag a few points before I invite my distinguished panel, as I mentioned, to weigh in with their remarks. Firstly, a suggestion was made yesterday that the so-called trade wars that have been going on could descend to being a full-scale war among armies and forces on sea, land, and air. Although one speaker strongly supported such a possibility, there were a number of other speakers who dismissed the probability of such an occurrence. What was also sought to be suggested was that all wars have led to rejuvenation and renewal of societies and economies. This, in my view, is a dangerous thought because, firstly, we should not speak about the increased likelihood of the Third World War as it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Equally importantly, the wars of today with nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines, missiles, aircraft carriers could make the Second World War look like a benign friendly match. And if we see that about 80 million people died during the Second World War, one shudders to think what the damage and loss in life and property could be if a Third World War were to be unleashed on the unsuspecting humanity. Which brings me back to the theme of this session, that there is urgent need for a change in world governance. But the question that it leads to is, what sort of a change should that be? Firstly, it is the United Nations which has the responsibility of ensuring peace, security, and economic development in the world. The question is, how far has the United Nations been successful in achieving it? And a fair response to that query would be that its success has been only partial. Firstly, it seeks to deal with the challenges of 21st century with instruments of the 20th century. The Security Council is a reflection of the victors of the Second World War. We need to realize that when the United Nations was established in 1945, it had just 51 members. Today, its membership is 193, which is 4 times of what its membership was to begin with. Yet, in the composition of the Security Council and the working procedures of the UNSC and the UN General Assembly, there has hardly been any change. It is indeed ironic that the body that preaches and espouses the cause of democracy in the world is itself not democratic in its functioning. In addition to the composition of the UN Security Council, as I mentioned, its functioning and that of the UN General Assembly need to be changed and refined. Otherwise, the United Nations, the world's premier governance body, will become irrelevant and will have no one else to blame but itself. Secondly, the point I want to make is that it is the developing and weaker countries that need international laws, that need rules, regulations, and governing bodies like the United Nations, like the World Trade Organization, like the UN Environment Programme, and others, because they do not have the physical, military, or economic strength to protect and safeguard their interests as the developed and more powerful countries do. So it becomes incumbent upon them to come together to reform the world governance system, like the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, like the World Trade Organization, and others, to ensure that the collective interests are protected and secured. Finally, friends, on the issue of trade wars that has been receiving the attention of the world for quite some time in recent months. We know that both Presidents Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping will meet in Buenos Aires on 30th November and 1st December. The two most contentious issues during the G20 summit that they will be discussing will be climate change and trade wars. The question is, what will and what can the world's most powerful 20 countries do to bring down the temperatures and foster greater certainty and predictability in international relations? Friends, with these brief comments, I turn to my very distinguished and eminent group of panelists for their remarks. As I said, I will first invite them to speak for about 8 minutes, and then we could have a discussion amongst the panelists and maybe throw the floor open to questions from the floor if time permits. So first, let me invite the former president of Ukraine, Mr. Viktor Yushchenko, to please make his comments.
Добрий день, шановні присутні. Я хотів говорити українською мовою, будь ласка, тоді ви налаштувались.
I'd like to speak in Ukrainian language. So.
У нас вчора була дуже інтенсивна дискусія,
Yesterday we had a very intense discussion
яка приходить до одного глобального висновку.
that leads to one global conclusion.
Якщо ви хочете сталу мати економіку, ви повинні мати сталий мир.
If you want to have a good economy, you should have a stable peace.
Якщо ви хочете сталий мир, ви повинні мати ефективну безпекову політику.
And if you want to have a stable security, you should have if you want to have a stable peace, you should have a good security.
Один із прем'єрів Європи колись говорив приблизно такі слова.
One of the prime ministers in Europe used to say such words.
Якщо ви не можете дати відповідь на безпекове питання,
If you cannot give a good answer to the security question,
ви не можете дати відповідь на жодне із питань, які стоять в політичному порядку дня нації і держави.
if you cannot answer the security question, you cannot answer any question which is on the agenda of the nation.
Я пропоную зараз, щоб ми подивилися на Європу,
I'd like us to look at Europe now,
і особливо Східну Європу.
especially at the Eastern Europe.
Чому Європу?
Why
Тому
Europe?
що Європа була батьківщиною двох найбільших гуманітарних катастроф минулого сторіччя.
Because Europe was the home of two greatest catastrophes of the past century.
Як сьогодні стоїть питання безпеки в Європі?
How is the security issue today in Europe?
Якщо взяти Східну Європу, сьогодні в регіоні Східної Європи є 6 військових конфліктів.
In the Eastern Europe today, there are 6 military conflicts,
Один із них гарячий,
and one of them is hot.
починаючи від Нагірного Карабаха, Південна Осетія, Абхазія, Крим, Придністров'я і Донбас.
Starting from the mountain Karabakh, and then Ossetia, Abkhazia, Crimea, Donbass, and Transnistria.
Деяким конфліктам майже 30 років.
Some conflicts are almost 30 years old.
І тут я можу зробити один висновок, що сьогоднішня політична Європа не має механізмів і інструментів врегулювання подібного виду конфліктів.
I can draw the conclusion that today's Europe doesn't have the mechanisms at hand to regulate such conflicts.
Нагірний Карабах майже 30 років,
Mountain Karabakh is almost 30 years old.
Придністров'я 27 років,
Transnistria, 27 years.
Грузія 10 років,
In Georgia, 10 years.
українські конфлікти вже 5 років.
Ukrainian conflict, already 5 years.
І ми не можемо твердо по жодному із конфліктів сказати, що ми маємо план його врегулювання.
And there is none of these conflicts we can see the specific solution that we can say this is the way we can solve it.
Це нас підводить до другого висновку,
This leads us to the second conclusion.
що Східна Європа колись із поясу стабільності перетворилася в пояс нестабільності.
Eastern Europe used to be the land of stability turned into the belt of instability.
Виникає логічне запитання, чому так сталося?
A logical question arises, why did it happen?
Що у витоках цієї проблеми знаходиться?
What is the source of that problem?
Звісно, відповідь може бути дуже довгою,
Of course, we can give a very long answer,
але я подаю спрощений варіант.
but I want to give you a simplified version.
Ви звернули б увагу свою, що в кожному із названих 6 конфліктів
Did you turn attention that in each of these conflicts mentioned,
окупантом, агресором або стороною, яка підбурює цей конфлікт, є одна країна – це Росія.
there is only one country which is acts as the occupier, the aggressor, or the initiator of those conflicts, and this is Russia.
Друге,
Second,
у кожній з цих територій, які я назвав,
each of those territories that I
сьогодні
mentioned,
присутня російська військова база
in each of those territories there is Russian military base today,
або військова частина.
or a military unit.
Третя ознака, що там знаходиться в кожній з цих територій маріонеточний уряд, який призначений Москвою, який визнає Росія, в кращому випадку Росія і Венесуела.
And the third is that in each of those conflict zones there is a marionette, a puppet government, which is recognized only by Russia, in the better case Russia and Venezuela.
Тому я хочу сказати, що це є наслідки небезпечної, окупантської, російської політики. Це так звана політика руського міра.
I want to stress that this is all the results of the occupant, dangerous occupying politics of Russia, so-called Russian world politics.
Я переконаний, якби серед нас у нашій дискусії приймав участь Уінстон Черчилль, він би приблизно сказав такі слова.
I guess that if Winston Churchill participated here with us today, he would have said such words approximately.
Шановні панове політики,
Dear politicians, dear sirs,
хіба ви не бачите, що від Балтії до Чорного моря побудована широка, висока залізна завіса?
can't you see the high and thick and big iron curtain built from Baltic Sea to the Black Sea?
Що цей кордон ділить Європу на два різні світи.
Can't you see that this border actually divides Europe into two different worlds?
Один європейський, демократичний,
One is European democratic world,
а другий середньовічний, російський.
the other is a medieval Russian.
Компромісу там ніколи не буде.
No compromise is possible between these two worlds.
Тому моє друге послання, чи другий висновок,
So my second message or second conclusion
Ніколи не задавайте запитання, по кому дзвонить дзвін.
is never ask question for whom the bell is ringing.
Ми живемо у світі, коли війну можна вести за 10 тисяч кілометрів.
We are living in the world today that a war can be waged from tens of thousands of kilometers far.
Ви можете жити в Барселоні,
You can live in Barcelona
але проти вас буде працювати чужий світ.
and another world will act against you.
Ви можете жити в Британії,
You can live in Great Britain,
у Литві, в Чехії.
Lithuania, in Czech Republic.
З вами може вестися фейкова війна, війна фейкових новин.
Fake war can be waged against you, fake news.
Ви можете бути дестабілізовані через свої політичні вибори.
You can be instabilized through your political elections.
Існує десятки причин, які нас підводять до того, що безпекова політика не може бути локальною.
There are dozens of reasons that lead us to the conclusion that security policy cannot be local.
І тому дуже важливо мати на увазі, якщо ми хочемо боротися за політичний суверенітет будь-якої країни над своєю територією, чи ми говоримо про Литву, чи ми говоримо про Францію, майте на увазі, втрата політичного суверенітету України – це втрата вашого політичного суверенітету.
Therefore, we should remember that in any country, when we talk about sovereignty of any country today, any country losing its sovereignty means you are losing your sovereignty.
Один європейський політик колись говорив, в Європі повинна бути або одна безпекова політика, або жодної.
A European politician used to say, Europe should have either one security policy or none.
Не може 3 бути безпекової політики.
You cannot
Не можна
have
10 безпекових політик.
You cannot have 3 or 10 security policies in Europe.
Одна, яка збазована на глобальних принципах.
One based on the global principles.
І тому я 4-те послання хочу зробити.
Therefore, I want to give a fourth message.
Будь ласка, не називайте конфлікти, які на Донбасі, українським питанням.
Please don't call those conflicts on the Donbass and eastern Ukraine a Ukrainian conflict.
Не називайте, що конфлікт, який в Південній Осетії, це національний конфлікт.
And don't call the conflict in the southern Ossetia in Georgia a national conflict.
10 років назад світ повірив, що Грузія напала на Грузію.
10 years ago, the world believed that Georgia attacked Georgia.
5 років назад світ майже повірив, що Україна напала на Україну.
5 years ago, the world almost believed that Ukraine attacked Ukraine.
Це брехня.
That's lies.
Ми говоримо про те, що насправді перед нами глобальні конфлікти між двома світами, які не вживаються.
We're talking about global conflict between two worlds that cannot coexist.
І якщо ми розуміємо, що це конфлікти, які мають геополітичний вимір, тоді ми повинні уяснити, що їх врегулювання можливе виключно через геополітичний інструментарій.
And if we believe that these conflicts are in geopolitical dimension, we also understand that they can be solved through geopolitical instruments.
Не можна такого роду конфлікти, як, наприклад, в Донбасі, врегульовувати з ніяким Захарченко, з ніяким Плотницьким, тому що ми всі повинні ясно усвідомлювати, покійний Захарченко не є джерелом війни. Покійний, живущий Плотницький не є джерелом війни, не є джерелом агресії.
Conflicts like conflicts in the Donbass today, they cannot be solved with people like Zakharchenko or Plotnitsky. The late Zakharchenko, we should realize he wasn't the source of this conflict. And today, Plotnitsky, he is also not the source of this problem.
Істинне джерело – це кремлівська політика.
The true source of it is Kremlin's policy.
За останні пару років світ викинув Росію із Великої Вісімки,
For the past 2 years, the world excluded Russia from the Great Eight.
забрав голос у ПАРЄ,
It took away its vote in PARE, in OBI.
29 країн Європи видворили 150 дипломатів Росії.
29 countries in Europe drove away 150 diplomats, Russian diplomats from their countries.
В останній зимовій олімпіаді заборонили виступати Росії під національним прапором.
In the last Winter Olympics, Russia was not allowed to participate under its national flag.
Працює багато санкцій
Lots of
різного
sanctions
рівня і галузей.
on different levels are working.
Другими словами, світ якось починає реагувати на це.
The world is beginning to somehow react to this.
В цьому році з Росії втекло 47 мільярдів капіталу і інвестицій.
This year, 47 billion of capital and investment left Russia.
Але залишається банальне запитання.
But there is still this simple question that remains.
Як діяти далі?
What to do next?
Я задаю риторичне запитання.
I'm asking a rhetoric question.
Чого боїться кожний окупант?
What is every occupant afraid of?
Солідарності світу проти його політики.
They're afraid of solidarity of the world against their policy.
Окупант завжди боїться другого фронту.
Occupants are always afraid of the second front.
Останню свою репліку я хотів присвятити тому, що другий фронт залежить від кожного із нас.
And the last thing I want to say is that the second front depends on each one of you.
82% російської нафти і газу, що виробляється, продається в Західній Європі.
82% of Russian petrol and gas is sold into Europe.
80% мілітарного бюджету Росії формують доходи від нафти і газу.
80% of the Russian military fund is formed from petrol and gas money.
У мене запитання до європейського громадянина.
And I'm asking European citizens.
Ви розумієте, що кожний кілограм бензину, нафти, кубічний метр газу, який ви купуєте в Росії, це є, по суті, єдиний спосіб фінансування агресії, окупації Росії, України, Грузії, Молдови, Азербайджану.
Do you realize that every liter of benzene purchased, Russian benzene purchased, or every 1 square meter of gas purchased is actually financing the Russian terrorism in Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan?
Тобто з цим я хочу сказати, що від кожного із нас залежить надзвичайно багато.
But I want to emphasize that from each one of us, a lot depends on each one of us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your very thought-provoking comments. Of course, you mentioned that Russia has tended to get isolated as a result of its actions in this part of the world. But I think if we were also to see Russia's power and influence continues to grow and increase, and I think the bodies which are really responsible for promoting international security, United Nations, or regional security like NATO, they have really not been able to respond in an effective manner. But possibly this is something that we are going to discuss in the time available to us after all our speakers have have made their interventions. Let me now turn to the former Prime Minister of Haiti, Mr. Laurent Lamotte, for your comments, sir. And if I could kindly request you to limit your comments to about 8 minutes or so, because then that will leave us with some possibility of interventions from the floor also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and it's a great pleasure to be here in this beautiful city of Istanbul and talking about global governance and the challenges and the need for change in global governance. And the main point, the challenges, of course, is the main challenge, I would think, is individual countries today don't feel the need to manage global challenges because they're focusing on managing, local, sovereign challenges that happens in their own country. So the question is, how do we come together? How do we come together as one against the short-term interest to manage the concerns of a collective long-term challenge and what's called the collective responsibilities? The collective responsibilities is what we see today is managing the world. With technology, connectivity, we see that the world is a closer place, whereas sovereign decisions are made on levels, and they are affecting the global challenges, such as, for example, climate change. And we see what happened in the US when President Trump, for example, does not even recognize the existence of global climate change. And how is it affecting our world today? And how is it threatening the world today as we know it? How do we manage the trade-off of the spillover effect? For example, the Amazon River in Brazil might not represent a huge priority for the Brazilian government versus the global lung effect that it has on the world. So global governance today is everything that a nation is facing, that the world is facing. We are looking at areas that are ungoverned, whether it's satellites, space debris, weaponization. Who has the responsibilities for the governance of these areas? The emerging commons challenges, the need to overcome those short-term decisions to focus on the long term. We have to strive to go beyond the market interest. And we need to think in new ways to come together and involve everybody. Small states that are often left out, and I'm coming from that perspective. I was the Prime Minister of Haiti for 4 years, and oftentimes, if you take, for example, in the climate change, we are the most vulnerable states that are being affected by climate change. Yet we have no say in the decisions that world bodies are making to change that. We see the impacts of hurricanes and what it does to communities and societies in small countries. It completely ruins a country every year, every time that there is anything climate related, all the economies go down. I was Prime Minister when we lost 120% of our GDP in an earthquake that killed over 250,000 people, injured 500,000. So the world needs to come together for better global governance and have to include small actors. And we need to also include and think outside the box in coming at new ways of thinking and including thinking outside the box, like-minded governance, business coalitions, online communities. Why not? Because the challenges of global governance today is affecting everybody. Because today, whether we want to recognize it or not, but we are living in a globalized world. We are living in a globalized world. And the instruments of governance, as we know today, are antiquated. They're flawed. And in reality, they're very ineffective. Because the national institutions are guided by very narrow objectives and oftentimes misguided priorities. And these objectives are not leading us to where we need to go. So the global governance becomes secondary, an afterthought, whereas it should be a necessity for the world to move forward. So there is a great need to really focus and put global governance decisions at the forefront for every government, big or small, around the world. Because technology is dictating us the pace at which to go. Today, technology has interconnected the world. And we've seen disruptions all over markets, whether it's the telecommunication markets. Today, the phone that you have in your pocket, that phone is, what it can do is a revolution. It's 1,000 times faster and more intelligent and 1 million times cheaper than a computer in the 70s. That has created a closer world. Whether it's through communication apps, whether it's by the fact that communication is now almost free, the access to data has changed the way we all function. We pick up a phone today, we can make a reservation in countries very far away from our own. We can see how other communities evolve. That has made the global governance world closer. And we should continue in that way. As the world is getting better, we have huge challenges. Species extinction is one, water shortage, climate change. But the progress has been incredible for the past 100 years. The average human lifespan has increased twofold. The average per capita income has increased threefold. Child mortality has decreased tenfold. The cost of food has gone down tenfold. The cost of transport down 100-fold in the past 50 years. The cost of communication has gone down 1,000-fold. The global literacy has gone from 25 to 80% in the past 100 years. So the world is living in better times, but the global governance is not catching up. And the international law needs to catch up with all these fast-track technologies that we have seen in our world. So the topic today is one of importance, is one of significant importance to change the world as we know it today. But we have to change the mentalities of local governments, local decisions. We have to change the mind frame of leadership. And everybody has to be included in this fight because it's affecting all of us. Warfare is changing on a daily basis. Right now we're seeing cyber war as a new way of fighting. Fake news is spreading like the plague. So how do we manage all this? Better legal framework. And the framework has to catch up with the advances in technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for your very insightful comments, and you raised very important issues, problems faced by small countries, the problem of non-inclusion of small countries, how they need to be, and of course that the world has moved too fast, but the governance systems have not really been able to keep pace with the changes that have been taking place. So how do we harness technology and how do we harness all the advantages that are available with the world today? My last speaker is the President of the Senate of Jordan, Mr. Faisal Al-Faiz. We heard from you yesterday also, sir. Very positive message you had given, and I'm sure you will be able to further emphasize that message in about 8 or 10 minutes.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
sir. Global governance in a changing world requires urgent reform of global political and economic institutions to meet these changes. It gives me great pleasure today to speak about a subject that is currently the most pertinent and urgent issue towards our efforts and ability to succeed in tackling our most important global social, political, and economic issues. One of the most pressing issues of our time is the urgent need to reform our global political and economic institutions based on the new world order of the 21st century. The 21st century is witnessing major power transitions and shifts from west to east between countries, and also power shifts between governments and non-governmental entities. While this shift in power dynamics should not necessarily be construed as a negative or bad change because it implies progress and prosperity, which is always a good thing and which was one of the aims of our global institutions post-Second World War, global institutions must adapt and reform to reflect these changes in order to be effective and not fall into complete obsolescence. We have witnessed a decline in the effectiveness and coherence of these world governance institutions for a considerable time now, as well as rejection of these very institutions by major world powers and a real threat to our governance institutions from challenges brought by new world powers. Therefore, it is clear that change is inevitable and swift and rapid action must be taken to address the new world order of the 21st century. Let me take the UN as an example. The United Nations organization was created after the disastrous war which ended in 1945. It was the second try after the League of Nations, which was also established after the First World War and failed to prevent the Second World War. Luckily, the UN did manage somehow to prevent a third major war, but its record in preventing continuous local wars does barely look convincing. The UN Charter was carefully designed to prevent military conflicts by resolving international disputes, by negotiations, and by peaceful means on the basis of the rules as established in the Charter for that purpose. There were attempts to reform and to update the UN system in the 1990s of the last century, but such attempts had failed. The veto system and the adamance of the veto powers to abolish the veto in favor of a more democratic UN, or even to put controls on its use, have blocked any meaningful reform. The UN authority and power as a result has been rapidly declining. Practically, the UN, which is made up of 193 member states, is governed by the 15-member Security Council, actually by the 5 permanent members who are privileged with the veto power. This formula has been repeatedly preventing effective UN action to resolve conflicts peacefully and lawfully, or prevent wars, of which we witness many right now. The Palestine question has been on the UN agenda since the global organization was created 70 years ago, but the UN has failed to enforce international law in resolving that chronic conflict. Failure to resolve this particular conflict has been directly responsible for depriving the entire Middle East region from peace and stability for decades. It is also responsible for the rise of extremism, radicalization, perpetual wars, backwardness, and violent forms or terror as never witnessed before. The veto privilege, along with power politics played in the UN arena, has been enabling world influential powers to manipulate the UN system to serve their own purposes and interests, even if not that legitimate, at the expense of international law and order, as well as international peace and security. Democratizing the UN system has long been on demand, but has also been hard to achieve. Smaller and vulnerable UN member states find it difficult sometimes to vote against the wishes of the more powerful members in order to also protect their own interests at the expense of the rightful principles and charter rules. This is a major issue that needs to be addressed. Other UN bodies' contributions to international welfare and better governance of international dealings with respect to health, education, trade, aviation, seafaring, culture, human rights, and others have been relatively constructive, but not totally immune from the negative trends as explained in the previous paragraph. We have seen the pressures of UNESCO has been subjected to for taking stands that did not please Israel, for example, and its protectors. The UNESCO was only doing its right professional work in protecting cultural sites in accordance with its mandate without any involvement in political matters. Having said that, I add that prosperity and progress should always be viewed as a positive change, and this was one of the goals of the post-war institutions, to make life better for everyone. But if these very same global institutions do not progress, adapt, and evolve to meet the rapid changes of the 21st century, then they defeat the very purpose for which they were created. The post-World War II institutions and subsequent values of the liberal rules-based world order that emerged after the destruction of the Second World War were not exemplary of the future. Therefore, many of the values those institutions were built on still remain strong, but one cannot ignore the new world order that is emerging on a global scale and which poses an enormous challenge to the international order built after 1945. The governance institutions that were created after the calamity of the Second World War, namely the UN, NATO, and the EU, the European Union, as well as the economic institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, which were created to promote internationalism, integration, liberal democracy, globalization, prosperity, and good standards of living, and to ensure relative peace and stability, are now in deep trouble. The rise of both left-wing and right-wing populism and nationalism across Europe and the world have emerged as a threat to the post-war liberal consensus and threaten to dismantle the very foundations of these institutions. The return to great power politics as a way of doing business is growing as nation-states increasingly seek to put their own interests first. Even the US already no longer abides by the rules-based order, putting its own national interests first, and Donald Trump is a clear example. National self-interest is challenging the very institutions that sought to combat it. China, along with America and India, are emerging as the new superpowers. Similarly, the global governance economical institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, have remained virtually unchanged since 1945, and these require urgent reform because the basis on which they were founded is no longer valid in the 21st century again due to the new emerging economies. The IMF remains dominated by the main shareholders, with the US retaining its veto power and the top managing director job given to a European member. Therefore, any reforms have produced very limited change, and much more needs to be done if these institutions want to remain valid in today's world. The European Union's crisis is another case in point, Brexit and Italy's budget as examples. Another major power shift we are witnessing in the 21st century stems from the advancement and availability of technology and the advent of the internet. This has created a shift in power between governments and non-government agents because as technology is available to everyone and at a very low cost, it has facilitated participation and provided access in international affairs to ordinary citizens. The internet has removed the barriers that prevented ordinary people from participating in world affairs. Something that was once only reserved for governments is now accessible to all. The Arab Spring and the enormous role played by social media is a perfect case in point. A full-blown revolution was made possible due to access by ordinary people to technology, in particular social media. The barriers of entry into world affairs have been removed and are no longer reserved only for governments and large corporations. A new type of international politics with many players has emerged due to information technology, which is powerful and important. Power nowadays does not only refer to military power, but also to soft power, which is gaining ground and shifting the power dynamic between countries and entities. While this has positive effects for many legitimate entities that now have a platform, the arsenal of soft power is also very useful to terrorists and for advancing terrorism and its agenda. Soft power is shifting the power dynamic from governments to other entities, even malicious ones, in order to adapt to the new international order, which is emerging without a doubt due to the inevitability of change in all areas: social, political, economic, governmental, technological. Institutions of world governments need to change and adapt with the times in order for them to be effective. Robust leaders are required to tackle populism, nationalism, and to deal with the realities of the new world order. Global institutions need to be updated, they need to be reformed to include emerging powers. Global governments need to improve and be more inclusive if their institutions wish to survive. The leading nations cannot continue to resist change out of an aversion to relinquishing their power if they want these institutions to be effective, legitimate, and accountable. Until a commitment for a credible plan by all stakeholders is established, these institutions face continuous threat and become less and less effective and eventually obsolete. In conclusion, world governance institutions must change to achieve more successful results in inclusiveness of politics and world economy. It needs to be more inclusive in all areas and must also reach out to non-state actors, civil society, and the private sector. The most important factor, however, is to change its whole perspective and focus away from power and more about how to accommodate the changes of the 21st century for a sustainable world order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for a very detailed and a very comprehensive exposition on the problems and challenges that confront the international community, the world governance, and what needs to be done. I understand from the organizers that we do not have time to throw the floor open for comments or questions from the audience. So what is left for me is to thank my very eminent and distinguished panelists for their comments. I think what has become clear is, number one, that all the panelists have stated that each and every country counts, and each and every country needs to make up its mind to ensure that world governance moves in a direction which is inclusive. Also, the fact that the world governance bodies like the United Nations, like the World Trade Organization, like others, they are slowly losing their relevance, and all countries need to get together to make sure that they continue to be effective, that they continue to be relevant. And particularly in these times when technology has moved so fast, and it is in the interest of smaller countries, it is in the interest of developing countries that they need to come together to ensure that the world governance, international governance, is responsive to the challenges that are confronted by them. So with these words, once again, let me thank the organizers and let me thank my distinguished panelists, and I would like to invite all of you to join me in giving a huge round of applause for the comments that we have got.
Thank you so much. We would like to present honor awards for you, and I would like to invite Mr. Cengiz Özgenci, the founder of the ICP, to present the honor plaques.